I would like to welcome our speakers of this session, Mary and Michael. Mary and Michael, welcome to the stage, and please give your talk to the audience.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Craft Conference for hosting us. Maria is going to be my silent partner today. She's doing our operations and outreach and coordinated this talk, and she's my audience that I can actually see. It's really helpful as a speaker to be able to see somebody's reactions to what you're saying. And so thank you, Marie, for being here. So this is a talk about, it's a general talk. Excuse me, I'm giving this talk today a general introduction to my thinking, and then I'm giving a very specialized talk tomorrow, same time. I don't know that's the same stage, but the same time about a very specific application of this kind of thinking that's sort of advanced. So let's go to this one first today. This is my collaboration partner, Michael Hammond, in this Integral Sense Making and Action School of transformational leaders and enterprise coaches that we have. He wrote a book called Evolve Agility. I wrote a book called Agile Transformation. And this presentation has some information or some is informed by both of those two perspectives. And the question that I know I've trained literally thousands of Agile coaches, Scrum Masters, Agile managers around the world over the course of my career. And they all ask the same question: why is this so hard? This is so straightforward from some point of view that we're going to implement Agile. It's much faster. It's got higher morale for teams. It creates more value. Why wouldn't we just do this? Why wouldn't we have a lean portfolio? Why wouldn't we have more sense and respond kind of leadership, not command and control kind of leadership? So from the point of view of the work that I've done, I think there's two big reasons. The first one is that there's some missing perspectives that we don't have when we do this kind of work. The integral model, which was developed by a man named Ken Wilber, has basically part of the system is that there's these four perspectives represented by each quadrant of this circle. This one is the first person orientation. This is a second person orientation, and this is a third person orientation, both of these together. And the top half is individual things, and the bottom half is collective things. So let's look at how that works. So the first window we're going to look at is what I call the praxis and behavior window. And when we look from this perspective, so it's a little bit like tuning your radio. I don't know that they hardly have FM radio anymore, but there used to be a thing called FM radio, and you would only tune in a certain band by how you change the dial, right? So we have a dial inside us, and sometimes we see only this perspective. We see that we're focused on business results. We want to innovate more. We use empirical thinking, and that's what we're about, right? And when we do that, what we see when we look from that perspective, we see things like metrics. What's our velocity doing? How is our burn down doing? We see practices like stand-up meetings and whatever. We see the way the physical environment is set up. The body that's part of our embodiment is this, and it's the place where we see people behave. We don't know what they think necessarily. We don't know what they feel. We don't know what their intention is. We just see their behavior. And this is all of these perspectives are perfectly valid. Not one is better than the other, but most transformation efforts focus almost exclusively on this perspective. It's a valid perspective. It's a perfectly reasonable place to start. It's just not nearly sufficient to get the job done. An organization is a complex system. So if we go down here to the ITS quadrant and look at the organizational architecture window, what do we mean by that? So here we're looking at the flow of value through an organization. And we employ systems thinking, we employ complexity, like human systems dynamics, Linda Oyoung, that kind of thinking. And we see things like policies, we see the org chart. Whenever I start an engagement, the first thing I do almost is to ask for the org chart, because I want to know what the relationships are between people and what was their theory of how they set up the organization. And that's its perspective. We see governance. Are we going to be able to get out of our governance process so that we can do Agile, because our governance process is very constricting, for instance. So when we look from this perspective, these are the kind of things we see. And we could say that both of these two, the left and the right-hand quadrants, both the it and the its quadrant, are what we might term outer agility. How well, do we do? Do we create new products, or do we react to change, right? And this is the place where scaled frameworks focus, and that's why they became so popular, because Scrum, which was what most people in the industry implemented, some people implemented Kanban, but not nearly as many as Scrum. They found that Scrum only deals with this area, it doesn't deal with this area at all. And so there was this huge gap from an organizational point of view in terms of roles, in terms of governance, and scaled frameworks, rightly or wrongly, filled in that gap. That's part of why they became so popular. Okay, so two more perspectives. One, the lower left, organizational culture window. So now we're going to see some really, really different things. So we're not looking at innovation, we're not looking at flow, we're looking at cultural resilience. And just think about how different that is than innovation. It has to do with the congruence or the coherence of our culture, and it has to do with our relationship to other people. Do we like the people that we work with? Can we treat them as people, or do we treat them as a role only? Right? We see an emotional field, like the tension that you could cut with a knife when you come into a meeting late and somebody just dropped a bomb. You can feel that, right? But that's a we kind of a perspective. You see people's mental models, or you see their relatedness, or you experience or sense their relatedness. So very different perspective, and you're getting a sense that these are really different from each other. And hopefully you're getting a sense that they're all important. This side is what I call inner agility, or human systems agility. It's a different kind, but both of them are necessary. Okay, so let's go to the last one, the upper left, leadership and mindset window. So here, this is a slightly strange term perhaps, that we're focused on the complexity of consciousness. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that in just a few more slides, what I mean by that. I think you'll get a sense of it. We see people's beliefs, their values are our own, our emotions, our thinking patterns. Those are all part of the realm of the I space, is the one that only we have access to. I don't have access to your I space, and you don't have access to mine. You can intuit it. Maybe you can sense what's going on, but you don't have direct access to it. You can only be told about it or experience something, right? Okay, so if you don't have all four of these perspectives, and if you don't treat them seriously in terms of organizational transformation, you're not going to have a sustainable change effort. You're going to have a pocket of something. You're going to have Agile at war with the culture virus, with the culture antibodies, right? Or whatever. Okay, so that's one big piece, is the missing perspectives. Like I say, most companies are really interested in the outer agility in the right-hand quadrants, and they don't know anything about dealing with the left-hand quadrants. They know they're important usually, but they don't know what to do with them. Okay, so let's switch a moment. Let me go back for a second. I'm going to address the colors. You've probably noted the color circles here. This color is amber, this is orange, this is green, and this is teal. And we're going to talk about those. This is the level of complexity, if you will, as you go out. Less complex, more complex, even more complex, and even more complex. So this is a famous experiment that's done originally by Piaget, a Swiss psychologist who studied human development, the first really big researcher into this field. And what he did was, you see this glass right here that's full of blue liquid. You can't quite tell, but the researcher is pouring, it's a glass that's identical to this one, and it had exactly the same amount of liquid in it. And when the experimenter poured it, so the kids saw the two glasses side by side with the same amount of liquid in it, and then the experimenter poured it into this taller, thinner one. And if you do this yourself, if I asked you which does it look like has more liquid in it, I think you'd have to say the right. Now you know that that's not true, but if you just look, you'd say the right. And that child says, yeah, the right has more liquid. Now this child, he's a little more smug, if you can get that expression on his face, because he knows he's performed a cognitive trick. So this is the same deal. Two glasses had the same amount of liquid. The experimenter poured it into this really tall, thin one, and said, which one has more liquid? And the child says, well, they're both the same. And the reason is because this child has what's called conservation of matter. He knows that you can't lose, you're not going to lose, at least in a practical sense, you're not going to lose liquid from that pour, so they have to have the same amount, because they started as the same amount and it just changed shapes, but it hasn't changed the amount. Okay. That's a cognitive developmental shift that happens between 3 and 7 or 8, let's say, sometime, that makes a big difference in what this child is able to do, right? And there's further things, of course, in terms of his development. But if you think about this child, would you say that this child is resistive or resistant to conservation of matter? No, that's ridiculous. The child's not resistant to it. That child is not developed enough to be able to see that or understand that. His mind is just not complex enough yet. It will get that way, but it's not right now. So that's the thing that happens to us when we're trying to implement Agile in organizations, is that the level of complexity is not a match for what we're trying to do, the amount of complexity in the underlying organization. From those 4 perspectives. So if we think about this, the task of leadership or of being a coach in an organization is to compare, on the one hand, the complexity of the world, and the other hand, the complexity of our mind. So people are familiar with this term VUCA. People are probably overly familiar with it. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. This is a term developed by the U.S. military quite a few years ago to talk about the conditions on a battlefield. And management thinking has changed it into a meme, essentially, because it's the dilemma that we face right now. Now, the opposite, stability, certainty, simplicity, clarify, does occasionally show up, but less and less. Now, there's a similar complexity of mind. I'm not going to go through what these mean per se, but just trust me that there's childhood stages, and then there's at least 3 levels. And we're going to be talking about later a code. So this is at the 4 to 5 level. This is at the 5 to 6 level. This is at this level 7. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So the environment's demand on complexity of mind is wherever it is. So you could run this as a slider for your organization. So is it really close to stability and certainty? Or is it sort of in the middle, or is it up here? For most organizations that are implementing Agile, the complexity of the world is up here. So then where's the complexity of mind? Well, it's down here. So that's a problem. That's a big problem. That's the developmental challenge, or the leveling up place. There are known techniques for making this kind of a move, but very few Agilists know that, and very few executives that are implementing Agile know that. But that would change everything to do that leveling up. So two forms different words for these same kind of idea of stages. One is, and think of this as a management paradigm, a management way of thinking. One is predict and plan. It's the approach that is appropriate to a world of complicated, not complex, complicated. Complicated and complex are not the same. They're sometimes confused by people. Predict and plan is appropriate to a machine kind of a metaphor for what an organization is like or what goes on. And at some point, the world was simple enough that worked. And now it doesn't. Now, a sense and respond approach, which is an appropriate leadership paradigm in complexity, is more appropriate. More like a rainforest, less like a machine. More like you can't control it. You would probably think about, controlling or, programming, let's say, this machine. That's quite feasible. Whereas you're not going to program this rainforest, right? You have to take a totally different response to that. Okay, so why so hard? Number 2. The culture code mismatch, which we've been setting up here. Just checking my time, got about 12 minutes. So these are 4 levels of culture codes. Level 4, 5, 6, and 7, corresponding to amber, orange, green, and teal. This is both from the work of Frederick Laloux from Reinventing Organizations, but it's also from the field of spiral dynamics. And it's in Integral, we call this notion altitudes, and that's why you see those bands around the whole Integral Agile Transformation Framework. So we're gonna talk about that. I'm not going to talk about level 3, because organizations that are organized at level 3 do illegal things. They don't do legal things generally. They're like gangs and Cosa Nostra. So the ones that we mostly, so let's look at these culture codes, because the culture code is going to be extremely important for when Agile fits in or when it doesn't. And perhaps you're starting to notice where does Agile naturally fit. These are 4 different culture codes that are alive in any given organization. And generally speaking, one of them, or the bridge between 2 of them next to each other, are where the culture sits or lights up most commonly. So in a conformist amber culture code, we are really all about order and certainty, and about doing our duty and in an honorable way and respecting authority. We just had in the U.S. we just had this holiday called Memorial Day, and you might have similar ones in Europe to honor veterans of wars. And there's the culture code of that is very much about honor and about doing your duty and about willingness to sacrifice. The mindset of this culture code is that you'll be safe following the rules. And conforming to group expectations has how I feel validated. There's a lot of benefits to this culture code, though the heyday of this culture code is long past. It's still needed in small proportions in organizations, but not in as big a proportions as it actually is at this point. The next level up, level 5, culture code, achievement orange, is now about a different kind of thing. It's a reaction in part to amber, and it says, let's break out of these walls. Let's break out of this bureaucracy. I'm gonna code some good stuff. This is ridiculous, too hard. So I need to stand out and increase my skills. And in terms of business, it's not personal. You hear somebody lighting up this meme, this culture code, say it's not personal. And what I get validation from is success in achieving goals within the game that we're playing. And we're probably playing a finite game, not an infinite game. A finite game has winners and losers. An infinite game doesn't. An infinite game is a different kind of game to play. This is what gave it this culture code gave us innovation and accountability, the R&D department, the idea of a meritocracy. So it's got, any number of uses. Next culture code, level 6, is very different. So again, as a reaction to the one before, it became a little too impersonal. It became a little too much, I treated you in a transactional way. I don't treat you in a personal way. I treat you as a transaction for what I can get from you in orange. And so green kind of reacts back the other way and says, no, I want to hear from people. I want to know who you really are. I want to know what's really important to you. I want to create a safe space so that you can be heard. I want to value diversity and different perspectives. And these are all great things from a certain point of view. They're a further increase of complexity over the previous level. And like any of these, they have downsides. So this can become toxic when it becomes highly politically correct and when it constrains people's, legitimate expression. So maybe you're starting to get an idea where Agile fits in. What are the values that Agile seems to resonate with? That's the question. Okay, and then this last level 7, culture code 7, is completely different. It's completely different. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, from safety and security to self-esteem to self-actualization at the top of it. This is the level of where the whole organization is into self-actualization, where it's driven, an orange organization is driven by profits primarily and market share and competitive kind of measures, external measures, outer measures. An evolutionary teal level 7 company is driven by its purpose. So it's not at all averse to making money, but that's not what drives it. It doesn't exist. Orange organizations literally exist to make money for shareholders. A teal organization would never do that. A teal organization exists for some purpose. And so it goes into a very different place of, this is very much where sense and respond leadership can come online. Okay, so how does each of these evolutionary movements show up from each perspective? So if we look at, if this was a pyramid, back to that circle, but now depicting it as a pyramid. So teal, green, orange, amber. And if we look just from the product and practices window, we start here in the amber orange ring with goal centric. Goal centric is basically waterfall. It's basically where we adhere to a goal for our product, scope, schedule, budget. Customer centric, which is up more in the green range, is what Agile promotes essentially. So can you tell if the organization is resonating at orange and amber, they're not going to be that into customer centric. They might pretend to be, or they might want to be, but they don't have, just like that 3-year-old child, they don't actually have the capability of being necessarily. And we won't even talk about systemic centric. If we look from the organizational architecture window down in this amber range, you're talking about a bureaucracy. So a company is going to show up, an organization is going to show up as a strict bureaucracy where you go up the chain, you go across, and you go down the chain. That's how communication happens in a bureaucracy. In a matrix, you've got the same kind of stovepipes, but you also have project management or value flows across them going the other way. That's what a matrix is, which is a political organization. And at this higher level, you have an adaptive or a market-driven organizational structure that very few companies have. Zappos tried holacracy. Some other people are dabbling with sociocracy. Really difficult, completely impractical for a big company. Certainly feasible for a small company, but even so, pretty hard. So if we look at the stages of cultural evolution, we already talked about these, so I won't go over those. So then now if we talk about the leadership and mindset view, the great bugaboo of Agile is command and control, right? And very few people, the majority of organizations, in my experience, are not at command and control. They're a predict and plan. So command and control is do what I say. Predict and plan is we're going to do a good estimate. We're going to get the best advice. We're going to get all the experts involved, and they're going to help us figure out, whatever. Sense and respond is a different thing altogether. Sense and respond is more, works better with Agile. So if you look at conformist-driven bureaucracy, goal-centric command and control, if you implemented Agile in an amber organization, does it seem like you could do what Agile wants to do? No, it's gonna toss it out because it can't. It's not developed enough to be able to handle that. If you implement it in an orange organization where you got a matrix, you got achievement-driven culture, you got predict and plan leadership mindset, you have maybe goal-centric still, maybe dabbling with people-centric. Again, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be very unlikely to work very well. The culture is going to change the practices that we have found work with Agile teams. They're going to constrain them into the achievement orange perspective. If we get to green, we get to customer-centric, people-driven. That's sounding a lot more Agile. At teal, we get even further there. Agile is, maybe you can see, is clearly in the green teal range in terms of its mindset, in terms of its design, and we're the best we can do at level 4 is going to be conformist driven Agile. We're going to do it because the boss said, and we're going to do it in a way, and we're going to report to the Scrum Master because they're the boss. That's just going to be the way it is. In an achievement driven, we're going to be constantly pressured for cutting costs, not for making people-oriented decisions. All right. I think that's all I'm going to say. Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much for the talk. Yes, let's give a virtual applause. It was very nice one. Thank you very much. Actually, before we getting into the questions, which I would like to encourage all of our listeners to put into either to the chat or more to the Q&A tab, and also use the polls tab, please, to rate the presentations. So how much you liked the topic and the presentation itself. So first of all, let me just introduce you, Maria and Michael. These are some small gifts from the conference organization, so you probably recognize yourselves. And
really?
These are like, this will be posted to you. So hopefully soon you will enjoy coffee or tea or whatever you like from these small mugs as a small gift.
Great. Vodka, is that okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Those are super cute.
So let's see the questions, and I'm going to the questions and answers tab. So one question from Balázs. Sense and response sounds reactive approach to me compared to planning. How does that give you more advantage in the business world?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's definitely not reactive. But it's interesting that you would say that. So planning, two things I would say about that. People in the Agile world, a lot of them know this quote by Dwight Eisenhower, American president, and I think he was the general of forces in Europe, said that plans are useless. Planning is essential. So you do planning because you want to recalibrate at each interval whenever it makes sense, each time horizon that it makes sense to do that. You do that to see where you're going, to see where you are now, to see what's important to you. But you take it as a theory or a hypothesis about the future that you know is going to be wrong. You know it's going to be wrong. Plans never work. They never work. They're sometimes reasonably accurate. They're sometimes in the general right direction. It's reasonably easy to plan for 2 weeks, though it definitely is not possible. People have sprints blowing up all the time, in 2 weeks. Thinking about planning a 6 month or a year in advance, that's insane. I mean, you can vision to know, to drive your compass, but you don't create a plan that you believe in. And predict and plan is when we create a plan, like in Waterfall with the Iron Triangle, scope, schedule, and budget, we actually think that we should hit that plan, and we manage our exceptions to the plan as if the plan was right and we need to adjust things to get on plan, as opposed to customer intent, for instance. So sense and respond is more about customer intent and about sensing the environment and what's true now, what's changed since I started planning, and what do I need to adjust to. And it's not being beholden to a theory that's now outdated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, plans sometimes imply that you would like to accomplish those plans, which maybe is an even bigger mistake, right? So we have seen in history such things as well. Next of our questions is Agile a binary state, or are you able to apply some Agile knowledges with good results? So can you apply part of Agile?
Well, that sounds like a loaded question. I'd want to ask that person what they meant, but I'll give it a partial answer anyway. I mean, so if you are not doing iterative development right now, it would be better if you did iterative development, even if you don't do stand-up meetings, if you don't have a product owner, whatever. It would definitely be better if you do iterative development. It would definitely be better if you put the customer at the center of things. It would definitely be better if you had the team self-organized in some way. Mm-hmm. That doesn't necessarily mean doing. And on the other hand, if you don't do the Agile package, you're not going to see the kind of results that you want. Most people are not. It does. There's a magic sauce to the whole thing. And whenever I haven't done team coaching for a number of years, but when I did. I was not open to, well, we're not going to do this part. I was like, then we're not going to do it, because you either do it or you don't. You always want to accept out your organization's picadillos, and that just doesn't work usually.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, let's take another one, and that is coming from. Thomas, Lalo's model is nice, however, it's still one perspective. Any company can actually show many properties fitting into various colors, always depending on its current context. What do you think?
Well, so I would certainly, if this is what you mean, it's hard to know when you just have a sort of a flat question. It's hard to know, two-dimensional question, when you don't have the person speaking about it. Yeah. It's certainly it's certainly true that there are pockets of probably all those levels expressed in most organizations, all 4 of them. But it is not the case in my experience that there's not a center of gravity that's true most of the time. When push comes to shove, organizations act a certain way, and most of them act from an achievement orange point of view. In the discussion. I mean, your results might vary. That's great. That's my result. That's my results. Mm-hmm. So you can cultivate pockets of green, let's say, or even teal in an organization. But what Lalo demonstrated, I think, definitively from my point of view, is the constraint is the senior leadership of the organization. You're never going to go in consciousness past the CEO and the board. it's impossible. You can do it for short periods of time, but you're not going to do it in a long-term sense.
Yep. Agree. Okay, so let's take the next one from Santosh. If we were agile already, do we have specific early indicators for scaling agile? Okay, so if
we have specific indicators for scaling.
Yes, do we have specific early indicators for scaling agile?
Oh, read that whole question again.
Yeah, I don't understand myself. So, if we are agile already, do we have specific early indicators for scaling agile?
Okay, got it. Well, the basic reason to scale. So the wrong reason to scale, which many companies do, is that they want to infiltrate and install a scaled framework top down. That's a really big mistake. SAFe, for instance, was designed to be done from the bottom up. It was designed to be after, to the questioner's point, after you had good agile teams going in the environment. And then you look for where are the teams that they can't actually produce a product by themselves. They need 4 teams or 7 teams or 12 teams to actually produce a product because of the space they're in or the technology or whatever. That's when you need to scale. But if a team can deliver value by itself, you should leave it the heck alone. You shouldn't implement SAFe everywhere, for instance, and expect everybody to do it. That's completely inappropriate. You need to do it when you need to do it, and you don't when you don't.
Let's take one more question from Paulius. What factors contribute to change in the organizational mindset? So what determines an organizational change from predict and plan to sense and response?
Well, you have to develop the left-hand quadrants. And the easiest one from my point of view to access is the I quadrant, the leadership quadrant, and going through a leadership development program. Ideally with the very senior management of the organization. You can certainly, this is the work that we do, is develop organizational leaders from a more socialized mind level to a more, least self-authoring mind and ideally to a self-transforming kind of a place, because that's where you get, the research is really clear that business results are much higher for a self-authoring or a self-transforming leader than they are for a socialized mind leader. It's not like just they're a quote good leader or people like him or something. It's that they get better business results. So the easiest thing to do, I think, is to develop leadership. And usually you have to do it it's not that you don't need to do it everywhere, but if you don't do it at the top and you don't get them to buy into it, it's not going to change things.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the answer, and thank you very much for the questions as well from the audience. Let me just check quickly. There is one more from Janos, maybe as a last one. My impression was that it is almost impossible to implement agile practices in an enterprise environment. What would you recommend as a safety belt if we still see the benefits to give it a try?
Well, what you do with change in general, you implement it in small batches. You implement it as pilots or in restricted or constrained places where you can protect it in certain ways. You have a contract with executive leaders, of what the dangers are and what they need to look for and what will, bringing an empirical mindset to it, like let's do this as an experiment and see what we learn out of it, is really important. So it's if there's a change urge within an organization to go agile, I think that's something you've got to pay attention to, and you have to not treat it too seriously like they know what they're doing, because they don't. From an organizational transformation point of view, very few leaders know what that means or what it's going to really cost them.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for listening to the presentation as well.